Welcome everyone to a webinar on practical tips for agile application security. I'll be a moderator today for this webinar. My name is Sunil Yu. I'm the CISO in residence at YL Ventures, and I was the former chief security scientist at Bank of America prior to my current role. I have the pleasure of having three wonderful guests for this particular webinar. I'll let them introduce themselves because they can probably do a better job than I can. But we appreciate you joining the webinar. And let me turn it over to Philip first to introduce himself.
Awesome. Thanks, Sunil. I'm Philip Martin. I'm the CISO at Coinbase, a global cryptocurrency exchange and custodian. I've been there for it'll be 5 years in April, so a nice long time.
And prior to that?
Prior to that, I spent about another 5 years at Palantir in a similar sort of security leadership role.
Good. Okay. Karthik, how about you?
Hello, I'm Karthik Nagarajan. I'm a director of security and privacy at Robinhood. I have been at Robinhood for almost 4 years. Robinhood's a fintech company focused on, we're a broker dealer as well as a platform for trading cryptocurrencies. I've been there for almost 4 years, leading security and privacy pretty much the whole time. Before this, I spent almost 4 years at another fintech startup, and before that, I was a red teamer.
Got it. Thanks. And then lastly, but not least, Chen, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Chen Gourarie. I'm the chief architect of Enso Security. Enso is an application security posture management solution. It's allowing application security groups to scale and gain control over application security programs to systematically protect applications. I'm coming from hands-on background. I was a pen tester for many years. I spent some years building applications myself, so I got the perspective of R&D on things. I spent some time doing projects in architecture and design of security up to national size projects. And my last role before Enso was the SDLC champion for Wix.com. I was responsible for all security processes around the software stack of the core component of Wix.
Okay, great. Well, so let's go ahead and start off. I think in the context of what we call agile AppSec, the term agile implies obviously speed and being able to work with developers who are running really fast or who are pressured to release very fast. In this new modern environment for doing application development, one of the main challenges that we have is just keeping up and being able to operate at the same speed that the developers have. What are, as you're building out an application security program, what would you say are some of the first steps that people should focus on in building out application security for an organization that is trying to move as fast as possible when it comes to application development?
I can take a first swipe at this one. I think you have to start with a deep focus on the engineering organization that you're going to be working with. I think the most important sort of foundational element in a great AppSec program is a level of mutual respect between the engineering and product organization in question and the AppSec team that's protecting them. I think unless you start with that, it's going to be hard as you scale this AppSec program to make sure that you're you're in the right rooms at the right times, because it'll become you trying to push your way in if you don't have that respect, rather than you being invited in, pulled in many cases if you do have that respect.
Actually, on the point about being at the right room at the right time, I'm not sure how large your AppSec team is, but how can you be in the right room at the right time for all the different AppSec application development activities that are underway?
I think you pretty rapidly outrun your ability to do that in a scaling org. Both because there's going to be inequalities in hiring pace. The Eng org may hire faster. You may have how that's going to work out, and because there just come to be too many rooms pretty quickly. So I think it's about making sure you're in the right rooms, right? From a risk perspective, and then making sure that you don't fall into the trap of like you building a program that reserves that like where you hoard the AppSec knowledge, right? I think a key outcome from any great AppSec program, especially as you're staring sort of scaling in the face, is enabling those PMs and EMs on this like large distributed engineering team to have the tools to make sane decisions, and also have the tools to know when they're sort of out of their depth and need help.
Out of their depth in what way? And in the sense of the developers not knowing how to address issues?
So like a great example here, you know, that I've seen sort of across the industry, I've also seen at Coinbase, is OAuth, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think anyone who's read the spec or tried to implement OAuth know that there be dragons in and around OAuth, right? And it's easy to have a very sort of naive approach to this, saying, well, you know, let's just pull the library in and add the thing, and like we're good, right? And the answer is no, absolutely not.
It doesn't work this way.
And so being able to have that open line of communication and educate folks, right, at the point you realize, oh, we're thinking about OAuth, helping people understand sort of where the dragons are, so that they can say, okay, great, like we're putting OAuth in. I remember we had that tech talk from the security team a while back about the pitfalls of OAuth implementations, right? So we should probably, you know, come to them to ask for help.
And you're about to say something as well.
Yeah, I said that it's not as simple as that. Yeah, about OAuth. Yeah, I'd say that it's also super important to. I think at the kind of a first step, it's super important to find out which part of it you are going to cover and agree that this is the part that you're going to cover. Because if you're coming for a clean sheet and there is no program, there is nothing, first thing you need to do is you need to choose how to focus, in what part of your inventory you should focus, and then think about how exactly.
So with respect to areas of focus, and this question goes to Karthik and to Philip as well. It seems like you guys both, your organizations both deal with cryptocurrency to some degree or another. And so you both have a really strong incentive to avoid the blockchain graveyard. Help me understand how that shapes and influences your ability to drive application security principles and application security mindset into the organization itself. We'll start with you, Karthik.
Yeah, I think I want to start by saying that Robinhood wasn't always a part of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, and we started off as a broker dealer that was doing equity trades, and over time we've built other products. And so security was always a core part of how we do business, right? So you can't handle people's finances without thinking about security from the ground up. So even before I joined Robinhood, security was always a part of the culture, and that helped me build the program I have today. But I think I'll plus one what Philip said earlier. Like, it starts with a strong engineering portion, a strong engineering culture. So one of the things that I ended up doing when I joined, and I was able to lean on my own background for this a little bit, was I spent my first 30 to 60 days just writing code with the rest of the software engineering team. So as part of it, obviously, I was looking for security bugs. I was looking for issues, but I just want to understand how people write code. Like, what does your development lifecycle look like? How does product drive decisions? How do you do unit testing? How do you do integration testing? Do you do integration testing? What parts of this can I plug into? And given your current level of maturity, what will I be most effective in? So as much as everyone wants to talk about shift left, the reality is at a fast growing startup, shift left gets harder and harder, not easier. And so, sorry about my dog barking, but I think what I want to say is we do this by engendering those relationships with the rest of the company. And so for me, at least, it started off by saying, hey, I'm going to be partnering with you and building these critical functions and handling whatever problems security-wise that you need to deal with. So we're going to be hands-on. My team is going to be hands-on along with you. And that's how we're going to solve this problem. And that builds that trust over time. So when we got into cryptocurrency trading, when we needed to build the sensitive functions for cryptocurrency trading, it was just a part of what we did. I'm going to mute myself now so that Philip can chime in and my dog can come.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's you know, I think that's exactly right, right? And that the challenge then, as you scale, as what Karthik said, is maintaining those relationships in a scalable way. And I think that's where, you know, if you can start from a foundation of a great relationship between you know, security and an engineering product organization, then you transition. Like the next thing I think that's critical as you scale is then making sure that you have the right view into what's moving toward production, right? So getting the inventory view in a place where, you know, you can start to discover where you might not be being pulled into the right rooms. I think, as Karthik mentioned, the shift left paradigm gets harder as you enter a rapid scaling phase, because the relationship building gets harder, and not everyone who's coming in a rapid scaling phase is going to have time to be sort of fully brought in, you know, drink the Kool-Aid, as it were, to become part of the overall relationship there, right? And so a set of automated controls around that are also super helpful.
On that point about automated controls, certainly with developers automating more and more of what they do in their software development processes, it would seem difficult, if not impossible, for security teams to be able to keep pace if our processes are manual. What are you guys doing to be able to automate these? How do you automate security governance for application security in your environment?
I mean, I'll throw a few sort of like quick pro tips out there that maybe folks that haven't thought about this deeply can implement cheaply. I think the real answer is a very, very complicated and hard answer. But so like the quick cheap tips here are, we keep a close eye on two things. On when we see new projects standing up in GitHub, this is a pretty easy control to automate. And you say, hey, there's a brand new repo that just showed up. What's that, right? And if you have a team that is like decently embedded in the product organization, the what's that question is normally pretty easy to answer. So that's an important one. A second one that we keep an eye on is development velocity. Just straight up like number of PRs, number of lines changed on a per project basis, right? So that we can say, yes, we expected all of these things and we have people looking at them and that's all fine, but what's that, right? That is a bunch of change we weren't expecting. What's going on? And we can go figure that out on the back end. Those are two super simple to automate things that you like, assuming you have a centralized GitHub Enterprise or GitLab, or really pick your poison there. You can almost certainly build those controls in a matter of, you know, a day, and get like a very rough automated control there. I think the deeper control needs to pull in a lot more data from a lot of different places, because those controls are almost entirely volume based. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you that that does not necessarily equate to security risk, right? I'm sure anyone who's been in AppSec long enough can point to a case where a single line change resulted in a vulnerability, right? And so
actually.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what was that? Which one?
2 characters resulted in a vulnerability.
Yes.
Solid.
Fail.
Yep. I wasn't thinking about that one, but that one is a great example of a very small change, no velocity based control would pick that one up. And you still need to be able to say, oh, hey, it's not a velocity, but I know this is a critical file. And so I want to be able to express some sort of like risk weighted alerting opinion about that, right? And so that is sort of the next step, going beyond sort of very, very quick and easy into like the much more in-depth controls.
I want to add a slightly different perspective from the like Robinhood runs a monorepo at this point. We were not always a monorepo shop, but we hired enough Google and Facebook folks, so we don't have a monorepo shop. And that actually, initially, I was a huge skeptic of it. I was a huge skeptic of having a monorepo, because I said, hey, if I have multiple repos, I can enforce access controls, I can enforce all of these things on these different repos and different settings and all of that jazz. But one thing that we did reasonably well is partner with our developer experience team to say, okay, you want a monorepo, here are the rules. You need to have a land queue. You need to have approved, like for each of these repos, you we have to have these rules before something is landed. You have to get all of these things that are in the monorepo should follow the same mechanisms to deploy. And so this actually helped us move a little bit faster and closer to a standardized build, release, deploy mechanism than we were before, where you said, if you are part of the monorepo, you automatically get a bunch of these things. If you're part of the monorepo, for instance, you will not be allowed to introduce a vulnerable dependency in Golang, Python, whatever it might be. You just won't be able to do it. You have to write to the security team if you really need to, because I don't know, cryptography introduced a Rust dependency or something. Sure, yeah, we'll figure out how to do that. But for the most part, you won't be allowed to introduce a vulnerable dependency into the monorepo. You must deploy in the following ways, and all of the controls that we have will now be applied to your code, which means that you can't ship without a review. You can't ship without integration test. You can't ship without all of these things. So building, like if you have a mature build and release organization, or at least a maturing build and release organization, placing your hooks there will help a lot, because then you can say, okay, the whole guardrails, not gates, build the paved paths. You can really double down on it and say, we build the paved paths by just making the easiest path also the most secure path. And if you want to do anything else, that's where we build gates. Like, you want your own repo, you want to do your own special thing, you don't get the guardrails. Sorry, it kind of sucks, but I gave you the guardrails, you chose the gates.
I want to follow up on that piece around making the easiest path the most secure path. We oftentimes see security as a barrier rather than an enabler. The question is, can we is making the easiest path the most secure path? Can the most secure path actually be made the easiest path?
I think so. I think, to me, it depends. It depends on where your organization is, right? Like, if you're in a rapidly scaling organization, to me, secure usually comes after easy. But if you're in a more mature organization, maybe you have if you have the investments you can make to make secure the easiest way to do it. But when I say, you have gates, if you don't want to follow our easiest path, that's kind of the carrot and the stick, right? The easiest path is also the most secure path, and vice versa. If you want to do something else, that's the harder path. It'll still be a secure path, but it'll be a harder path.
Yeah, and what I meant by harder and easier here is we can create burdens that make it harder. All right, we can say, well, you got to check all these boxes and fill out paperwork and triplicate, all this stupid stuff that we could do to make a path harder. But there's another view that we have where the security functions that we put in actually do speed up the development process. Not because the other processes require lots of paperwork, but because the maturity that comes in by having some of these security guardrails actually helps mature the build and release functions as well. It's sort of complementary, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. I think saying, for instance, one of the things we rolled out for our Terraform repo is this secure linting thing. Like, as part of your regular lint, we also run a secure linter, and anything that is insecure will be like, hey, you probably don't want to do this. Here's a better way to do it. So yeah, I totally agree. Like, putting your security static scanning tools, dynamic scanning tools as part of your CI/CD pipeline, amazing. If you have the engineers and the ability to do that, that's awesome. My experience has been that a lot of, even the more advanced tools aren't quite ready for the CI/CD speeds yet. Where somebody might want let's say I'm writing code and I want to ship this code, I don't want to wait 2 hours for the builds to pass, or 3 hours, or however long it takes for most of these scanning tools to run. I want the tests, we want our tests to be as fast as the slowest set of integration tests. So yeah,
I think it's critical. And so I think one of the great things about working in cryptocurrency is I think, a lot of companies only start to think seriously about security once they hit like a medium plus size, right? You get a few hundred people in the company, and what I've seen at companies like this is that the development process has already sort of like ossified a little bit, right? The paths have already been set, and there's a bunch of like effort required to sort of break out of that. At Coinbase, I was in the, as far like for me at least, the unique position of being able to sort of be part of building that stuff from scratch. And so we've done a bunch of talks on this, a system we have called CodeFlow, that manages sort of the cradle to grave, like PR to prod deployment path. And it makes it super easy as long as you, the developer, exist within this sort of like CodeFlow framework. You get a bunch of stuff for free, right? You get deployment gets taken care of for free. Security scanning just happens magically. You get comments on your PR where we find, you know, security bugs where we have line numbers around them. Like this, all this stuff just magically happens, right? And that's what I think, and where I agree with you, Sunil, that like that's where being able to make the secure path the easy path is just so critical in being able to get folks on board. I think you're also correct, Karthik, in like a lot of security tooling just is not built for modern sort of DevOps, agile development, pick your term, speed. And you know, it's trying to run HP Fortify right on the back end for every single PR. So like that's just, it's not gonna work, right? And so we've had to also do a bunch of work around being very sort of targeted and tactical with where and how we bring scanners into the pipeline. The trade-offs between, you know, real time, scan the PR, overnight, like scan a much broader thing, maybe it's different scanners, more heavyweight scanners, that kind of thing, and think very critically about like the right level of security to inject in what part of the process.
You know, so there's ways that we've been able to, there are things that we can automate to some degree. There are things that I think will remain manual, maybe forever. Unfortunately, we'll see whether they're ever be automated. But there are some activities I think that we want to be able to do at scale, but just aren't able to. One of the things that comes to mind is threat modeling.
Yeah.
Okay, love to be able to automate threat modeling. Another one might be pen testing, to be able to pen test in some sort of very systematic but yet automated way. What do you envision those two pretty critical elements of the AppSec process in this modern AppSec application development pipeline that we have to face every day?
I'll caveat this with, I haven't actually done this fully yet, but in my ideal world, I'll start with the threat modeling piece, right? In my ideal world, it's simply a question that is asked as part of making a PR or a def or whatever term you use for it, which is like, first you have to train you have to have security champions or some version of it that you've already worked with your team on. And then as part of it, you say, does this, like, based on what you know about what you're changing, is there a meaningful change to how you're processing user data, or like some set of questions that help us answer, does this require a quick reassessment of a threat model we already have? And again, this assumes that you've done a initial threat model for all these applications already. And so new changes should just be, does this need to be reassessed based on the change you're making? Or maybe you're integrating with a new vendor, maybe you're doing something fancy. I haven't yet seen this done super well anywhere in any type of velocity. Like there's always a backlog, there's always a bunch of JIRA tickets for us to get through. But that is my ideal world that I am trying to work towards. Is it's something a developer that is making the change is able to answer for us as part of making the change based on a set of simple questions. The pen testing part, I don't think we'll be able to get to a point where we will have, at some point we'll lose the fidelity and the value if we just try to automate it. To me, part of a good pen test is that you're looking for mechanisms that you haven't thought of before. And so for me, a pen test always has to be a little bit of a manual creative element. You may have automated dynamic scanning that is automated, but the way I think of a pen test, there always has to be a creative manual element to it.
Yeah, I would actually strongly agree that like for the threat model portion, I think my dream world aligns with Karthik's, that there's some sort of like heavyweight threat modeling cycle that happens on a relatively infrequent timeline, and that cycle may involve, maybe entirely within an engine organization, may involve the security partner or whatever the right org's term is, but that there is a very lightweight way that engineers can provide like per PR feedback to say, this sort of like we do this a little bit on things like PCI scope changes, right? I think it's a very sort of coarse-grained version of this, right? Does this change impact credit card processing, right? And things like that. If yes, there's a much more significant process that needs to go through, and if no, then great, we can move on. I think something in that direction, but much more finely grained, is probably what we'll need on the threat modeling side. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot is how we can express that threat model in some sort of more like machine readable language. Like I would love to move toward a world where, as part of static analysis, that static analyzer can, build the AST for the app, and can also read in a machine readable threat model and say, okay, these functions are the ones that like this threat model is mostly pinned on. I don't see any changes, so like we're fine. I do see changes, so let me flag this for some sort of like engineer review, or even just ask the question, hey engineer, like please confirm that you've reviewed the threat model and no changes need to happen, something like that, right? That I think is getting more towards something that would be very interesting implementation.
Threat model as code.
Yeah, I think it's where we have to end up. And I think that there's a big tooling problem. There's a big understanding, especially in scaling orgs, right? Like anything that adds friction to the development process, that slows the development speed down, has to be justified. And I think right now, trying to inject that, like the tooling's not there, the process of the education isn't there for most developers. But I think that's where we have to be headed as an industry.
Yeah, if somebody can write threat modeling into a compiler, I would pay for that.
I think that in terms of threat modeling, what can also be useful is if you establish automation of collecting the threat intelligence. So maybe not necessarily threat intelligence, but to collect the information that helps you simplify the question that you ask during a threat model, because you have a standard technology stack. This actually relates to the question you asked before, Sonil, about making it simple for developers. I think that security teams should strive to help developers build in a way that the simplest option for a coder in the company would be the safest option. And then what you collect for threat modeling is the deviation from this standard. Well, it's not an easy thing to do, but if you build a standard that is safe, and then you collect information that shows which assets are deviating from this safe standard, and if you actually invested in making the safe standard easy, you are actually making a right step in the direction of secure design. And this could actually, for real, support a scaling organization in many ways. And for pen testing, I would simply say you can outsource it with bug bounty. I think it's a very effective and simple option to scale up pen testing activity, as long as you can manage it, as long as you can share with the community of the researchers the information that they need to conduct activity that is up to your level of pen testing.
I don't know if so Coinbase, we've been running a bug bounty for like 8 years, 9 years, something like that. And it certainly is a valuable piece of our overall AppSec puzzle. But I don't think in a complex architecture that it can be a replacement for pen testing. Especially when, from a front end bug bounty perspective, they might not be able to reach all of it. In fact, in many cases, they can't reach all the various underlying pieces of an infrastructure that should be pen tested, right? Because I don't want to just say, oh, a customer can't reach it, therefore we shouldn't pen test it. I want to assume an attacker gets through the outer layers of defenses and can sort of interact directly with these systems. And I want it to be sort of hard all the way. I want not a what's the thing? I don't want a crunchy outer shell and soft gooey center. I want a marble, right, all the way through.
Yeah, I agree, but I find myself sometimes wonder what would happen if companies would take some of the money that they spend on tools and contracts and just bring it to their bounty program. They make the bounties pay better for the researchers. And what would be the effect on this? You will get more high-level research, more interested top-level researchers interested in your inventory. And I think that this could have an interesting effect. And eventually, it comes down to how much dollar you put into a specific tool. And then you
I
make
totally
the
agree. So we actually, our top end payout for our bug bounty is $50,000, which is a pretty high bug bounty payout.
Yeah.
Across the market. And we paid out a couple of those, and almost uniformly, we paid those out to people that did legit novel security research.
Exactly.
Which is amazing to see. And I was happy to pay the money, right? And that's insanely valuable, but it's not pen testing.
I have to agree. I think it has to be both. Like if you're truly strapped for, it depends on the company also. Like for instance, for Coinbase and Robinhood, you have to have there is a financial incentive that there is a financial incentive for the bug bounty, but you also have to put in your own money to do anything meaningful. With our platform, you have to go through CIP checks, and for a lot of the researchers, that's just not an option because there may not be based in the countries that we have customers in. And so in those situations, like have bug bounties been, I've been running a bug bounty at Robinhood, and then before that, I've been doing this for 8 years. We've received some really awesome bugs, but the bugs that we've received during pen testing have been even more awesome. And so I think it has to be, if you can afford to do both, definitely do both. If you can only afford to do one of the two, I would say definitely spend your money on good pen testers, because you're going to find things that will terrify you.
With respect to, so part of this was prefaced on the notion of manual efforts that would otherwise slow the train down. What have you had instances where you said, look, this hasn't had a pen test and thus we're going to have to stop your deployment, or this hasn't been threat modeled? In what cases would you actually stop the trains for something that actually requires a manual effort?
I've had to do that a few times. I think whenever we are launching a net new product, like if you're launching something that has never seen the product surface before, and it's a net new product, and it hasn't either been through a threat model or a pen test, and we're releasing it to say 100% of our customers immediately, then I've gotten in the way of it and said, you can't. Like, you either have to find a slow ramp, or you have to wait until we are able to get reasonable amounts of confidence here. It hurts every time I have to do it, but it's important. We have a responsibility to do it. Yeah. The other thing that happens a lot is our product teams are like, oh, our customers are only X% of our customers are going to get it. But then I look at the underlying API, and there's nothing at the API layer that's stopping your customer from interacting with it. It's just a product facade. And in those cases, I've said, that's cool, but you're still taking the APIs public, and I care about those more than I care about what a user can see. So you just have to either spend a few hours with my team and convince us that there isn't a risk here, or wait a week. The good thing is we have pen testers on a retainer, so it's very easy for us to turn this on and turn it off as and when we need it. But external pen testers on a retainer, so that makes this somewhat easier for us, where the wait time isn't a month. The wait time is a week, but I've used it rarely. I've maybe used it 4 or 5 times in my tenure at Robinhood. But I've definitely used it when I feel that the potential, I always look at the underlying financial cost of it. Financial cost being potential lost money for customers, potential lost money for the firm, regulatory issues, or any number of things. If that is above a certain threshold, I say, sorry, this just has to wait. It's not worth the risk.
Right. I think this hits upon an earlier comment that you guys made around building mutual respect with the security team and the engineering team. I would suspect that they would just ignore you if you hadn't built that degree of respect with each other. Well,
They would definitely ignore us.
So question with respect to indicators of success. So how, I guess you get a sense from your own sort of notion of how you think you're doing, but are there any hard measures that you can point to that indicate the degree of impact that you're having in your application security program? Like, and more importantly, how would you know if it's not working? Where would you know if it's failing? What's the measurement that would be indicative of that?
So the sort of like the North Star metric that I use is a metric we call shipped exploitable bugs. And this is just a straight count of the number of times that a bug that we think matters made it all the way to production. Before either we found it or a bug bounty found it, or however we discovered it. And I want that number to be always trending down. If it's trending up, that's a good sign that somewhere in the process we're seeing breakage, and we should go investigate and figure that one out.
Okay.
Yes. An additional direction to measure this is to see to how much of your inventory you are reaching with your activities. If you see that the activities that you've selected are not sustainable, meaning that you can't apply them to where it matters, and your ability to apply your strategy, your tactic of application security goes down because the developer organization grow up too fast, I mean that it's starting to fail in terms of scale.
I have a follow-up to that question, but before I jump to that, Karthik, can I hear your answer in terms of the metrics?
I was actually going to say bug bounties are usually how I get a better sense of some of this, because there have been times when we've had a reasonable confidence that things are trending in the right direction, and then we receive a bug bounty report and we go, wait, that should never have happened.
Right.
And that's when we take a look at things and go, okay, what did we miss and where did we miss it? And we sort of recalibrate. So this is where bug bounty is actually super useful. I would also advocate for internal bug bounties, not just external ones. Internal ones where you have clear rules of engagement, obviously, but where you're encouraging developers to report things they potentially find. So those have been, to me, the clearest indicators of where things are going versus number of lines of code scanned or threat models or pen tests. Like those, to me at least, they tend to lead to a little bit of a false sense of confidence, where you may not have, in a rapidly changing and scaling environment, there are new facts that you just don't know. And so having somebody from the outside come in and tell you something changed here, you might not know about it, is very useful.
So what I was going to ask just now was something that you, Karthik, just brought up, which is when you discover things that you didn't know. When it comes to, let's say, like the endpoint space or network activity, we oftentimes lament not having enough visibility. What's the equivalent here for applications? Like where do you feel like you lack visibility when it comes to the application space?
So most companies that we meet and discuss it with have basic inability to show and list down which assets they have, and to show what kind of asset they have. What is it that they have, and do they care about each part of it? They lack it in many different levels, and it blocks their activity in application security in first getting the attention of executives, because you can't actually show what is the scale of the problems, what is the propagation of the problems. It blocks talk with engineers, because if you don't see the full picture, you have inability to communicate in the language that engineers needs to. Basically, like we were discussing in the seminar in this webinar about scaling development bodies, they have superpowers, CI/CD and build systems, and they have superpowers. And if you don't have automated eyes on it, it becomes very, very difficult to know what is it that they're building. And even if you see, a list of artifacts emitted by your build automation service, you have to profile these to see which one of them which one of them you want to threat model, for example. Which if some projects did not get to you naturally, organically came for advice from security, you have to find out which, maybe an application was made by a student who is only starting a part-time job and is learning, but this application for some reason acquired access to your user account database. So you need to have this kind of visibility to be able to make the decision where to act in the manual activities, get in the right rooms, like Philip said, or do the right level of pen test, like Kartik said. You need to be able to see enough information to let you stay focused on the right places.
I have a question for that, if you don't mind, Sunil. But I agree with everything you're saying. Like, the challenge that I see as somebody that's tried to solve this before is it's hard, especially when your engineering organization is doubling and your security organization may or may not double every year, or at least your AppSec organization may or may not double every year, and it doesn't scale the same way. There is an inherent business context that you'll be missing. Like, no matter how many pen tests you do, or whatever you do, like, there's an inherent business context that you're missing into how some of these applications are built or why they might be built that way. So when that is the case, like, there might be a very legitimate reason for somebody to say, I want to acquire user sign-up data to perform whatever I need to do in this application. There might be other cases where it was easy for me to do so. So how do you think, or like, sure, a pen test could help us discover this, but from acquiring the business context perspective, that's where I see a lot of security teams not doing so great, is not like thinking purely from a risk perspective and not necessarily from a business needs perspective. So how should people think about that?
So yeah, in my opinion, a good approach to this would be to apply the activities, to apply your strategy or your tactic on the asset based on its sensitivity, no matter what is the business justification to use it. Because a business unit might need access to a specific asset or specific data to perform specific actions, but in order to make sure that the asset remains safe, you still need to conduct the right activities on that business unit, no matter how important or unimportant the business justification is for accessing the asset. The fact is that you can't do it all over the place, and then you basically need to build a kind of a match between how much you are expected to invest in security as a business unit, depending on how critical and how sensitive the assets that you're touching are. And this is and a key to doing this would be to understand these relations inside the technology, which will also help you get the business context, I believe. But it's a journey. It's not something that you can do, wake up in one morning and start doing. It's to get deep into your to blend into the organization and work side by side with the developers on understanding this.
Philip, any thoughts on how you can bring in business context in a more efficient way?
I don't think that have really been like they're novel in this conversation. I think that you have to invest in long-term relationships. I've said before in other contexts, I think a good AppSec partners program kind of operates like a good like long-term sales organization, in that they're interested in building relationships, right? And they understand that you may or may not, buy from them, engage their security services with any one interaction, but that you are building for the time when they do need that, right? And with this sort of relationship forward AppSec attitude, I guess you might say, I think that you naturally get better and more business contexts. I think that this is not what we as an industry are building right now in terms of like AppSec talent. We're building, great technical folks who can find bugs and, who are amazing at it. And that's super important. And I never want to sort of undersell that. But what we also need are people who can build relationships, people who can have hard conversations without everyone leaving the room angry. People that can take the long view of of interacting with a given business unit. And I don't mean that to say that people who can let the small things slide. I don't think that's the point at all. But the people who can focus on engaging not just when there's a problem, but when there's no problem. And really building that relationship context.
I guess the challenge to answer Karthik's question, the challenge is going to be when you're trying to scale that. When you have well-defined applications, let's say it's only I don't know. Sorry, at my prior organization, we had something on the order of 5-digit number of applications, and that was just the defined, officially sanctioned ones. And there were thousands, I'm sure, that were not well documented either. But let's take that to another level. I mentioned earlier in terms of visibility for endpoints. If I find some host, if I find some server, if I find some AWS instance, how do I know the business context of that instance unless I can stitch together some sort of context from all these other data elements I can pull in? I think even if I own the asset, I would have trouble figuring out, okay, what was the business context of this? I think I need to have something that I can scale beyond just the relationships.
I think that's true.
Yeah. So when I think about visibility into my application assets, I mentioned defined applications before. Now multiply that by the number of APIs per application. Now you're wondering, okay, what was that API for? And the problem becomes orders of magnitude more challenging to understand the relationships between all these different things.
I think developers organizations are also facing the same problem. They scale up, and in some teams are building the same functions basically because they're not aware of another project, and they are building to solve this through using the data that they have on their development organization, the different kind of asset management system that they have repositories to manage the code. They have a build automation server when they centralize a lot of the processes, and they taking in this information as developer organizations and using it to solve the same problems of knowing what's going around. And I think it's a good idea for security to do something similar.
Okay, so we're almost out of time. Let me ask one last question for each of y'all. It's actually a pair of questions, and feel free to answer one or both. What would you say is the most valued activity in your AppSec program? And conversely, what do you think is the least valued activity or tooling? Okay, most valued activity or tooling in your AppSec program. What's the least valuable activity or tooling? Start with Karthik.
Yeah, most valued, I'll double down on the relationship building. I think anytime a developer or an engineer or a product manager comes to us and they ask us questions and we engage with them immediately and we're able to offer them help, it doesn't even matter if we get something out of it. It's just that process is extremely valuable. And if I could double down on anything, it would be that. Least valuable is we are often involved in third-party risk assessments as, hey, we want to do a security review on this integration. Odds are that integration plan will change 3 months from now or 6 months from now when we actually do the integration. So if I could do anything to somehow stop doing that or do that much later, that's what I would be doing.
Okay.
I think my answer here, well, I'm not just going to just +1 Karthik's relationship one because that's not an interesting answer. So I'll maybe give you my second most valued thing behind that, which is I think the work that we put into CI/CD integrated security controls. I think we've done some really cool work. We've open sourced some of it. So if anyone wants to take a look, we have a github.com/Coinbase. We have a few projects out there. The one in particular that comes to mind is one called Salus, which is sort of a CI/CD integrated static analysis security scanner and orchestrator. So we can bring the right scanners to the right repos at the right time. So and I would happily double down on more fully developer lifecycle integrated automated security controls. On the least valuable side, I think it would have to be like check the box compliance oriented security trainings. Right, like this comes into scope via a number of regulations. PCI is sort of most notorious for this. But like making sure that my developers can rattle off the OWASP top 10 is not like zero value, but it's relatively low value versus a training regimen that focused on the business context in which they are writing code, right? And that taught them how to use the frameworks and like what we're protecting them against for free. Things like SQL injection and XSS and things like that they would have to try incredibly hard to introduce one of those vulnerabilities given our frameworks. And then double down in business context, API, knowledge management, that kind of thing. So less of the compliance-driven checkbox security training.
For me, it would be gathering the data because I think it is crucial, especially if you're just starting, to convince the executives of the importance of the things that you do and to be able to talk to be able to actually accomplish the first integration into the organization and to talk the right languages and to pass the right messages to the right groups. So to invest in collecting the right metrics. About failing, I think that it's only very important to do, generally speaking. But it is everything that you do takes it costs and it takes you out of focus. And I think that there is a problem with losing too much focus to already known vulnerabilities because they are cool. Because, for example, if you have a known RC in your organization, it will take a lot of the attention of the security teams. Everybody will party around this cool finding. But the actual risk is not in the thing that you already know. It's in the things that you've missed and the things that you haven't reached, the things that you haven't done. And I think that this should be something that it is important to make sure that that vulnerability management doesn't take all the focus from what you're doing.
So to wrap up, I'll answer the question as well. I think the most valuable was a set of security services that we created for developers to create that easy path. Perhaps the one that was most widely used, as you probably can imagine, is secrets management, something that helped offload that from the developers. The least valuable was the PDF report of the static analysis scan that came a week after the code was committed. I'm sure you can figure out why that would be the least valuable. Anyway, with that, thank you very much for attending the webinar. Thank you very much for Enso, who sponsored this webinar as well. We hope that you appreciated the insights from our guests here. And we look forward to being able to connect again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. It was a pleasure.